Welcome to the Folk Center for International Business Forum and our 300 registrants for today's event. I'm Karen Brocious, Executive Director of the Center, and we very much appreciate you being here online and in person. Today's exciting program brings together the worlds of international business, public policy, and political science. The forum represents the collaborative involvement of our campus community and showcases the university as the international educational home of our state. The Folk Center is the hub for international business, education, and research in the Sunoco International Business Department here at the University of South Carolina at the Darla Moore School of Business. Our mission is to advance leadership and ideas to help businesses and communities thrive in a very complex world. I would like to deeply thank Ambassador Wilkins and Ambassador McMullen for their time today, and they are very much looking forward to the discussion. I would also like to extend a special welcome to Peter Zimmerli, Consul General of Switzerland, Robert Skukanis, Acting Dean of the South Carolina Consular Corps, and Lawrence van Doveren, Deputy Consul General of the Netherlands, for coming to Columbia and being with us today. After the forum is finished at 5:45, the ambassadors and I would like to invite you to come on stage and talk with them. Please make your way to the stage through the door on your left and then come through the back, and they would be very happy to meet with you. My thanks and appreciation for this forum go to our event sponsors, Governor Jim Hodges and his wife Rachel, and Jeff Sema of Michelin North America, which has its U.S. headquarters here in South Carolina. Jerry McDermott, Faculty Director of the Folk Center and Professor of International Business. Our university partner, the Walker Institute in the College of Arts and Sciences, and Bob Cox, co-moderator. Chris Mangum, Chair of the Folk Center Global Advisory Board, for being here today, and Dr. Randy Folks, for whom the Folk Center is named. I also would love to thank the Moore School faculty, alumni, students for their commitment to international business in their studies. As a note, this forum is being recorded and will be added to the Folk Center website for viewing. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the President of the University of South Carolina, Harris Pastides, for a special welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, a rainy afternoon, but we have some excitement here inside this beautiful auditorium. It's an honor and pleasure for me to be here. As you know, I came back on a temporary basis, but I'm also aware that only Michael Jordan had a successful return, and so I'm very sensitive to that. And by the way, his third return was disastrous, so I'm aware of that too. I'm particularly pleased to welcome two good friends, two distinguished South Carolinians and Americans, Ambassador McMullen and Ambassador Wilkins, who are both, as I said, personal friends, but also friends to this university and to higher education in the state. They truly are. Both have represented our state and continue to so well in public affairs and in diplomatic service, and we're fortunate to have them as featured speakers today at this forum. I love it when our university can host discussions of this kind that help build both cultural understanding and corporate engagement, and many other things, by the way. Love to see the students here, so many of you. Thank you for being here. We need to do more of this, frankly. Our university and all of us need to do this, because the world's most pressing problems, America's too, are not to be solved deep within any one discipline, but at the interface, at the nexus of multiple disciplines. And without coming together, we're never going to solve those problems. So I'm excited about that. We need to seek those new pathways for collaboration, global collaboration, but how about starting locally as we are today? You remember the bumper sticker, right? Think globally and act locally. That's what we're doing today. This is, of course, the home to the nation's #1 international business program, ranked in the top 3 for an impressive 32 consecutive years. And no, that does not just come by doing the same thing over and over again. That's what Einstein said, right? You can't keep doing the same thing and expect better results. And so we continue to evolve and change, and I'm grateful to our dean and for the other leaders of the program here. This year, we're also celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Walker Institute in the College of Arts and Sciences. The Walker Institute was named for another ambassador, Richard Dixie Walker, ambassador to South Korea. But he was here first. He was an East Asia expert, public scholar, and advisor to many presidents as well. He founded the Institute to be dedicated to global research and outreach, but especially for you, the students, to help students tell the global story and to engage them, viscerally engage them in world affairs. And today, the Folk Center Forum is being offered in partnership with the Walker Institute. This forum, focused on the theme of remaking America's geopolitical and business leadership, will open doors for the kinds of discussions that bring these realms closer together. I'm so excited that Karen invited all of us to come back on the stage for an informal coffee clutch, if you will. No coffee, but there'll be other things later on in the evening. So thank you all for being here today to take part in this important exchange of ideas, but as important as our distinguished guests are, so are you, the audience. So let's do this all together. I'll turn the program over now to our moderators, Professors Jerry McDermott and Bob Cox. A pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, President Pastides. And before we begin, a couple of things. I personally want to thank all of you as the faculty director of the Folk Center and a longtime professor in our department. We try to always bring you some interesting venues and forums, and we're always very excited to see all of you turning out, whether it's our esteemed Dean Peter Bruce, our advisory board members, our alumni, colleagues, and of course, you, the students. That's why we're here. A couple of ground rules. This is a 2 out of 3 fall fight. But we're going to have a period of questions that Bob and I are going to lead and have a cultivated discussion with the ambassadors. And then we're going to turn it into a Q&A session with all of you and with those of you online who are watching. Those of you online, we are tracking you can post your questions via the chat or the Q&A function. And we have people recording those. For all of you here, we only ask that for a number of reasons, you use the standing microphones. There's 2 of them over here, one there, one here, when you have a question, okay? So let us get moving here. Let me give you some introductions first of our esteemed guests. Ed McMullen served as the U.S. Ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein from 2017 to 2021. He's worked with clients in public policy, politics, and business, nationally and internationally for more than 30 years. He is currently the Senior Policy Advisor at Adams & Reese, a multidisciplinary law firm, which is well represented throughout the southeast of the United States, and he's leading their intersection of business and government practice group. Something that title fits very well, not only with our business school, but indeed with our center and our department. David Wilkins served as the U.S. Ambassador to Canada from 2005 to 2009. He's currently a partner at the law firm of Nelson, Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough in Greenville, and chairs the firm's Public Policy and International Law Practice Group. David served 25 years also in the South Carolina House of Representatives and was elected Speaker in 1994, a position he held for 11 years until he resigned for his ambassadorship post. He's a recipient of numerous honorary degrees and awards, including the state's highest honor, the Order of the Palmetto. Both ambassadors, of course, reside in South Carolina and have given much to our state through their leadership and service. And to the far left is my esteemed colleague, Bob Cox. professor of political science, comparative politics, and expert on foreign affairs and EU politics. He was also served as the chair of the political science department and for many years as the director of the Walker Institute. Bob, I turn it to you to kick off the discussion.
Well, thank you, Jerry, and thank you, all of you, for being here today. It's a pleasure to have the presence of two distinguished ambassadors with us to share some very important insights about a really pressing issue. And so I'd like to start with a question that really gets to the heart of this forum today. In the public imagination, we often think that the role of ambassadors is to be the voice of their countries, to present their nation's issues on national security interests, engage in high politics and international affairs. But I'm sure both of you have experienced the trade and economic activities are really important part of that activity as well, and occupy a good bit of an ambassador's time. So my question is, I'd like to ask you to share with us some of your experiences of how trade was a really important part of the role of an ambassador and why that's so important to representing your country abroad. Ambassador McMullen, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, first I just want to say how nice it is to see Dr. Pastides sitting here in the crowd and back on the stage as president. And we're a very valuable asset to the institution, and I'm great to have you back here. And also to the Honorable Consul General from Switzerland. It's great to see you, Mr. Zimmerli. Thank you for coming. So this is an interesting question because trade is one of those issues you would never think embassies are really that actively engaged in. You commonly think that the U.S. trade representative or the various agencies in Washington are responsible and focused on these. And I went to Switzerland for the first time on November 17th, 2017. And I presented my credentials, and that evening the U.S.-Swiss Chamber of Commerce had the top CEOs and chairmen of the boards at a dinner for me, and I went to that dinner. And at the dinner, I was inundated with requests to make the priority of my ambassadorship a free trade agreement between Switzerland and the United States. It had not been on the radar screen at all through all the briefings, all the Senate hearings, all the things that I had gone through. And it was very interesting because it was a pivot point for me to really say to these gentlemen and ladies, it's not something that has been on the agenda. The country team project for or focus for the U.S. has not been a trade agreement, but let me do the research. And so I went ahead and I delved deeply with Swiss leaders who had worked 7, 8 years before on a trade agreement, with U.S. leaders who had done the same. And we made phenomenal progress over that period of time. In the embassy, we have a fantastic team of professionals. Some of them career foreign service from the State Department, some of them Commerce Department individuals who've been engaged for years, many of them not even American citizens, but actually Swiss citizens who work in the embassy and have a historic knowledge of the issues. So bringing them together and working with scholars and experts and trade representatives, we were able to get great progress on trade. And it's one of those things where you go into the ambassadorship thinking you have the focus, but then you learn very quickly, the first night I'm there, that there's a different focus that we spend a great deal of our time on.
Well, first of all, thanks very much to the Folk Center for having us, and Karen, thank you. And Harris, great to see you again, my friend. It's a pleasure to be with you. I look forward to your comments and speaking to the students now, your comments and your questions here in a few minutes. Yeah, trade is a very, very important part of being an ambassador, particularly if you go to a country like Canada. Probably our most famous ambassador, our first ambassador, Ben Franklin, said that an ambassador was an honest person sent abroad to lie for his country. I'd like to change that and say to advocate for his country, because that's what you do. You advocate positions and the issues important to your administration and to the United States. Canada is all about trade with the United States. We have 5,250 miles of border, 120 land port entries. We are each other's best customer. 75% of all their exports we buy. They buy 28%. They're our top exporter recipient as well. I think $1.7 billion worth of goods and trade cross our border each day between Canada and U.S. They buy more than 4 times more than China does from us. and more than all the European countries put together. So trade is huge to Canadians and to the Canadian government. The saying up there goes, if the U.S. catches a cold, we get pneumonia. So they want our economy to do well, so we'll buy their goods. During my 4 years, almost 4 years in Canada, we always have a number of trade issues and trade irritants. We had softwood lumber, where the U.S. had imposed over a long period of time over $4 billion worth of tariffs on their softwood lumber. About a third of all our American housing, the framing for the housing, that wood comes from Canada. And right now there's a big dispute, and I'll refer to that in a little bit on some other comments about relationships matter. But we had that. We had the COOL, which is the country of origin label that prevented some of their poultry and livestock coming across. And they're always fearful of protectionism in the U.S., of Buy America clauses, which is in some of the infrastructure. Some of that language is in the current pending infrastructure bill being debated in Washington now. So while it doesn't completely consume you with Canada, because there are other issues like NORAD and defense of North America we deal with, but trade is hugely important. It boils down a lot of times to relationships and trust.
Well, let me ask you or follow up on this. So you both have, prior to becoming ambassadors, you had different career paths. So let's start with you, Ambassador Wilkins. Like, what, particularly your time at the state legislature, and not just at the national level, and then you become an ambassador. How does that inform your job, or what may you have seen or thought about that others wouldn't? And then after he goes, you could say, well, given your experience in law and business, what did you say? So
yeah, that's a great question. Of our 150 or so ambassadors worldwide, about 35% are political appointments, folks like Ed and I that came outside of the State Department because of the relationship we had with the President of the United States. The other roughly 65% come from the State Department, foreign service officers who have served 20, 25 years, and then by panel inside the State Department get recommended to the White House for appointment as ambassador. They obviously would know a lot more going in as far as the workings of the State Department and all the issues around cables and things of that nature. But I think political appointments too can bring a lot to the table. I think I knew very little about the State Department, but I learned. And I'm also in an embassy like Canada. You got in Ottawa, in the embassy, you had 200 Americans, whether it be U.S. Commerce, State Department, all the law enforcement agencies, all the military attachés. You had a host of people that were a lot smarter than you were that could fill you in on any issue that came across your desk. So you had a lot of support. But what does somebody outside the State Department bring to an ambassadorship? Well, in my case, I like to think I had two transferable skills. Number one, I was a politician. I was in the State House for 25 years. I'm used to dealing with elected officials. Where in Canada, it's a parliamentary system, right? So the cabinet, or they call them ministers up there, but they're secretaries. They're equivalent of Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense. They have to be a member of the parliament. So they have to be an elected official. Well, I related to that. Same thing in their provincial government. I knew what it was to put bumper stickers on cars, ask people for a vote that didn't exactly give you the answer you were hoping for. And so I think the fact that I had been an elected official, in fact, I told them I'd been on the ballot 13 times. Nobody in Canada is ever on the ballot 13 times because their terms are 4 years or longer. I was a 2-year term. Now, I didn't tell them that of those 13 times, I only had opposition 5 times. In Canada, you always have opposition. But they didn't ask me either, so I didn't tell them. But, I had that in common. And the other thing is, and I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I was used to dealing with the media. As Speaker of the House, I was dealing with the media and answering questions every day. And so I felt comfortable doing that. I will confess to you, the media that met me in Ottawa is a whole lot different than the media in South Carolina. a lot tougher. And but it was having that experience. They have scrums up there where after you give a speech, they surround you, just pepper you with questions. And they weren't too enamored with my appointment to start with. I think the first headline I saw up there was Bushport's Southern redneck who knows nothing about us. And I didn't necessarily disagree with that, but I didn't like it. But in any event, I think, Jerry, those having dealt with elected officials for a long time and having experience dealing with the press, although it was a different press and much more adversarial, helped me a lot.
Well, one of the ambassadors just hit a very important point. I think when you look at the difference between most foreign services around the world have professional diplomats. They have been in the government throughout their history. That's their tradition. The U.S. tradition is an interesting one, and we're unique, and some other countries actually have adopted this, in that Benjamin Franklin was our first diplomat who went overseas, and then Thomas Jefferson to France, and both of them came back and made it very clear that it's important for diplomats to have an understanding of the real world and not just the government, but also it's important for them to have a relationship with the president. Particularly in countries like Canada and the large countries, China, Britain, it's very important for the leaders of those countries to know that when they need something, they can call the ambassador in right down the road and get an answer and get a response. In Switzerland, a small country, but a very important country, and the president, when he asked me to take this position, knew that he wanted to focus on economic development, jobs, and bringing more of them into the United States. And he wanted a businessman who understood that world. And so I was able to, within the first year, got through all 26 cantons and met with over 100 CEOs or chairmen of boards. And we understood each other about what was important for the priorities in the US and in Switzerland. And we all laugh in the US about Switzerland's the beautiful country with cheese and chocolate and beautiful places to see. It's actually a much more serious, important, and they're not an ally because they're not in NATO, but they're a very close friend and partner. And in that, you have the 6th largest foreign direct investor in the United States coming out of a country of 8.5 million people. And that was something the president knew was a critical priority, to build the relationship, to build the bridge, strengthen it, and make it ever stronger. And I'm very proud to say that we were able to accomplish that. I got there, Switzerland was the 8th largest foreign direct investor. By the time I left, after putting priorities and working closely with a government in Switzerland that was eager to do this, we got them to the 6th largest foreign direct investor. Those are jobs in the United States that are paying over $100,000 a year. There's over 500,000 of those jobs in the United States, many of them here in South Carolina. So this is the importance that I think we diplomats play, and I think it is very important too. When you look at my skills, I was in advertising. I had an advertising firm. So I knew how to message and convey the message of the president and work with the foreign country, Switzerland, Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein's a little smaller than Switzerland. It's got 35,000 people. But it's actually extremely important in the U.S. economy because they have a huge investment and very strong economy. It's one of the wealthiest countries in the world. I think the average income right now is $165,000 a year in Liechtenstein. So yeah, it was an amazing opportunity, conveying the message, being able to have those skills. And I think Ambassador Wilkins, I actually visited Ambassador Wilkins when he was ambassador to Canada. And I can tell you, in a large country that he was in, the respect that he commanded and was able to achieve, some of the negotiations he undertook were some of the most difficult. But because of his skills as a Speaker of the House and his savvy and how to accomplish these goals and successfully achieve them, these are the skills that I think are very important for diplomats to have.
Jerry, if I may just satellite on that, jump on that real quick. Most of the G20 countries get political appointees, and a country like Canada has always had a political appointment. And quite frankly, they'd be offended if they want the president's best friend, so to speak, to come up there because they want to know they have access to the White House. Very important to them. Unfortunately, we've not had a U.S. ambassador in Canada, in Ottawa, since over 2 years. And that doesn't send a good message. We need an ambassador on the ground.
These are really helpful insights to understand more about the broad array of things ambassadors do. I wonder if you might comment for the benefit of our students, what sort of things could they be thinking about right now that might prepare them for a career, whether it's through the Foreign Service or to become an ambassador at some point in their careers?
Me? Well, this is why I wanted to take the opportunity to come up here from Charleston, and it's a long ride up in the rain, and spend the day with you, because the students here at the Darla Moore School of International Business at the University of South Carolina need to know that you are the future of this country, and you are going to contribute substantially and can contribute substantially to your country through diplomacy, through foreign service. And I know many of you come because you want to go into business, and you love to travel, and you love languages. And these are very important things in the world today. Americans frequently think that we could walk around the world and speak English. Friends, you can do that, but you'll never get to know the country you're in if you don't understand the culture and try to speak the language and really interact. And this is what this institution does. #1 in the world, right here in Columbia, South Carolina. And it does it well. And so my challenge and hope for you is that you will be inspired to seriously look at the careers that are out there. Yes, you can make a lot of money when you graduate immediately. It takes some time to work up that ladder. But think of this career path. This is an opportunity. When I became ambassador, the cones, the various areas of specialty in the Foreign Service, they call them cones. You have the econ cone, the government cone, the management cone, all the different areas of expertise. You and your degree going into the Foreign Service would present so many opportunities for economic, trade, and other commerce-related issues to be on the cutting edge of business. And you will actually be able to travel around the world, speak different languages, engage in ways you never could through business. And you become an asset to a company, a CEO or a chairman of a board looking for someone with those skills after you spend 10 or 15 years, 20 years in the Foreign Service. You'll have a great time, great career. It's the early part of your life, the best time to travel. But then to go into business and make some serious money and gain great respect for the experience that you have actually taken from this university and into Foreign Service. I hope you'll consider it, because it really is an opportunity. I can tell you, there are not many unhappy Foreign Service officers. They love their jobs. They trade every 3 years. They're moving around from one place to another, and they're doing some challenging things in challenging places, and it's very fulfilling.
Well, Ed said it well. I agree with him. You get a degree from this school in international business, you can be competitive anywhere in the world. And it gives you really a leg up on many, many folks. Foreign Service officers were very impressive. I didn't really know what to expect, but I will tell you, the ones I dealt with were very professional. They're very, very smart, and most of them speak 3 or 4 languages, and they're patriots. They're very patriotic. And if you choose to go that route, I think you'll find it very rewarding. There are different ways to do that. I'm told the Foreign Service exam is very, very difficult, and only about 2 or 3% that take it the first time pass. But most of the folks I talked to passed it the second or third time. Well, they were excellent Foreign Service officers. And many of them were people that went out in the private sector and worked for several years, and then went into the Foreign Service. I had a consul general who's very good, he's today a very, very good friend of mine. He was consul general in Calgary when I was there. He was a 23-year, I guess, career Foreign Service officer. After he left the Foreign Service, still at a relatively young age, he went to work as an analysis advisor for CAP. And CAP is the equivalent, Canadian equivalent of API. It's the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Located in Calgary. Worked there for a number of years as a top executive, and then went to work for Exxon. Now he's retired, but he had a great career after the Foreign Service. So whether you do it before or after, it's a career path that I think anyone interested in international business should consider.
Let me follow up on at a more macro level about this theme, because in a way you've been getting into the more details about the functioning and the process. So maybe you can give us some perspective, again, because you come at it from different points of view, about this interaction between, call it geopolitics on the one hand, and trade, because we always look at, well, there's business and economics and trade, and we put that over here, and then there's the mess of politics and geopolitics and social activity over there. But essentially, your job was always at the nexus of these issues, or at least you would see them, if not deal with those nexus every day. Maybe you could give some insights in your experiences to how you saw these things interact, especially in the maintenance or development of trade and investment.
Yeah. I'll give you two I think, great examples. Again, the U.S. and Canada, largest trading partner, neighbors, allies, friends, but yet we have irritants. Softwood lumber being probably the largest irritant over centuries almost. There's a great picture of President Abraham Lincoln on the battlefield of Gettysburg, and I think it's November 1863, after he had just delivered the Gettysburg Address. And he's surrounded by 50 dignitaries who were there to see him, and one of those was a Canadian. He was there in 1863 to talk to the President of the United States about the irritant, the issue of our tariffs on softwood lumber. And that was actually before Canada became an official country, which they did in July of 1867. So that issue's been around a long time. When I went to Canada, it was it permeated the entire relationship. Everywhere I went, didn't matter where you went, what you want to talk about, nobody cared to listen. They wanted to know about why we were not treating Canada fairly, why we were imposing these draconian tariffs on their softwood lumber, affecting their jobs, raising the price of housing. And so Harper, Prime Minister, got elected in February of 06, and a few weeks later met President Bush at a North American meeting, and the first thing he said to him was, softwood lumber is my #1 issue. So I saw the President a couple hours later before we started doing our official bilats, and he said, I met Harper. I like him. I want to help him. He can help us. He said, he told me softwood lumber was his #1 issue. I told him it was my 112th issue. How are we going to solve softwood lumber? And so we had our meeting with his advisors and chief of staff a couple hours later. He brought it back up again. How can we solve softwood lumber? And they all turned to me. And I said, Mr. President, I'm not smart enough to tell you how. There's too many nuances. USTR can help you figure that out, but I can tell you this: if you want Canada to be our best friend, and they are right now, they had early troops on the ground in Afghanistan. They had the province of Kandahar, which is one of the toughest areas over there. And I said, you will figure out a way to solve this issue, because it is affecting our entire relationship. He turned the card and said, I want USTR in my office Monday. What senators I have talked to get this resolved? I went down that list. 3 months later, for the first time in decades, softwood lumber agreement was signed between the United States and Canada. And it lasted 9 years. And then it expired, and now we're imposing billions of tariffs on softwood lumber from Canada again, and it's still in litigation. But that's a good example of how relationships make a difference. And you think about trade and this, that, and the other, but that relationship at the top between countries, where one president is willing to use his political capital to move the sides to the middle, and the prime minister on one side pushes his team, and nobody's happy, but they get an agreement the last 9 years. And so relationships really, really matter. And one more quick story. First time Prime Minister Harper and Bush met after he'd been in the Oval Office, after he'd been prime minister about 6 months. Bush's second term. They go through a litany of issues. And interesting enough, the United States president, and this is not a criticism, always talks about international issues, whether it be Iran, or the threat of North Korea, or Afghanistan, or whatever the issue might be. Because trade is so important to Canada, they're talking about more local issues. There's a problem with Ambassador Bridge. There's a problem with this crossing or that crossing that affects our trade. There's a problem with your coup legislation that affects our poultry. And it's right innocent. But at the end of that 2-hour meeting, Bush turns to Harper and says, and you got to understand, Canada is the little brother and the big brother. So there's a little bit of a sensitivity there. And so the prime minister always wants to be friends with the president, but never too close to him. So Bush turns to Harper and says, on these issues, do you want me to brag on Canada or you want me to criticize you? You know, because he was trying to help relationships matter. And it matters in everything we do, but it even matters at the very top country, when two big countries side by side, how those two leaders get along affects policy.
Yeah, definitely. In my experience, one of the most interesting bilateral experiences, multilateral experiences, was Switzerland is host to the World Economic Forum every year, Davos, and President Trump came to Davos twice, as did numerous cabinet secretaries, and everyone thinks that Davos is a big cocktail party, and I've never seen the intensity of diplomacy like you do in those 3 days. Because you have all the top international leaders, all of the staff, the cabinet secretaries, and they're all in this one little town in Switzerland where the snow was literally over my head as I went down the streets, impossible to get around. But it is a place where presidents are able to sit down and have bilateral conversations. My personal experience was one where I saw one of the major issues for us and continues to be a major issue, frankly, was the Chinese and some of the issues regarding intellectual property protections. And the president felt extremely strong about gathering a force of the willing among the Western and other countries and their leaders to put pressure on the Chinese to come into line with 21st century practices of protecting intellectual property. Switzerland was a unique place to do this because Switzerland is frequently considered #1 in productivity, #1 in technology, #1 in research by any standard, one of the, if not the top, it is among the top 3 in the world. And so we were able to really bring together some experts, some leaders, some international leaders at that Davos to really get some results. And from those conversations, from those bilateral meetings that the presidents were having, we were able to see the Swiss came on board, and then multinational companies and others came on board and really pressured presidents of various other countries. And we were able to see in the last 2 years, 3 years, some serious changes in China's policies. Now, eternal vigilance is the price of protection. And we're going to continue to have that vigilance with the Chinese and others. It's not just the Chinese. There's counterfeits. There's all kinds of countries that operate in this way. But seeing diplomacy work in a way that most people misunderstand what's going on because it's a multilateral meeting of experts at a nice location, it really is an intensity that people are getting 3 and 4 hours of sleep a night getting these kinds of deals arranged and agreed to.
You know, we have a bunch of questions we could keep initiating, but I want to really open it up to our audiences too. We'll go back and forth. I know we have some questions that it came in online. Anybody in the audience, please just come up to the microphone here. Don't be shy. Some of our esteemed guests, I'm sure you have some hot button questions you want to give the ambassadors. But go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm a one-year MBA candidate. So just a question for the ambassadors. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like getting used to the cultural norms of the respective countries you were in? I know that Canada, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein are probably somewhat like the United States, but can you just talk about like how you sort of acclimated to that?
Great. Can you repeat that? Yeah, it's hard with the mask. But
How, I think she was asking about how you got used to the different cultural norms or political norms, and you had to sort of quickly acclimate and understand what's going on there.
for you, it was easy.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting. I knew Switzerland very well. I traveled there as a young man. We spent a lot of time as a family there. I was a part of the American Swiss Foundation Young Leaders Program when I was in my 20s. So I knew Switzerland well, and the president knew I did, and I had immense respect for the Swiss. But what was fascinating to me was that many of the previous ambassadors had told me, because I talked to many of them, and ironically, President Clinton's ambassador, Dick Frederick, became one of my best friends. He gave me great advice. You'd never think that President Clinton's ambassador would be advising President Trump's ambassador, and they become as good of friends as they were. But ambassadors are not partisan. They really aren't. You have a job to do, you focus on it, and you get the job done regardless of who you have to work with. But I think for the Swiss, many ambassadors told me, you know, the Swiss are very difficult to get to know. They're very cold. You know, you'll never get invited to their homes. You'll never really get to engage with them. But that's the Swiss. Folks, don't ever listen to someone telling you something about someone, because you know in your heart what you can accomplish. And what I knew was that the Swiss that I met and have interacted with all of my life were warm people who embraced Americans and love America. And I had more invitations to private homes, and I continue to have those invitations. And that interaction, that time you spend with getting to know people, whether they're CEOs or farmers. I spent time with some of the local farmers because the farming issues were a major issue with trade. And I'd go out to cheese farms and go into the barns with them and talk to them about opportunities for their markets in the United States. And these were some of the best moments of my experience in Switzerland. And you know, the key to success is never to have someone tell you this is the way it is and assume that's the way it has to be. Because there are so many opportunities for friendship around the world, even among the countries where you would expect at least. I was invited to the ambassador's residence, the Turkish ambassador's residence. It is this Turkish ambassador to Switzerland. And shockingly, sitting there was the Iranian ambassador. Now, the Iranian ambassador and the US ambassadors are never supposed to be in a room together. We have no diplomatic relations, we don't engage. But you know, I had learned a great deal from the former ambassador to the United States from Iran, Ardashir Zahedi, who's 94 years old, about what was really on the minds of the Iranians, because Switzerland is the Iran's, they're our protecting power with Iran. They do all our negotiations with Iran. So I was engaging a lot on Iranian issues. And we brought prisoners home from Iran, thanks to the Swiss, who actually negotiated those deals. But, you know, we have to face reality. There are problems politically with our countries, but the people of these countries are good people. And we need to make an effort to get to know them and reach out to them.
Great question. I'd only been to Canada once before I arrived as U.S. ambassador. Once you're appointed, they discourage you going into the country. Susan and I had visited there for a long weekend in Niagara Falls when I was in the U.S. Army up in that area of the United States. And so press did not let me forget the fact that I'd only been there for one weekend. You know, it's like anything else. You get briefed on it, and like Ed said, the former Clinton ambassador to Canada came to Greenville, sat down. He and his wife sat down with us to tell us everything that they had experienced. Actually, both of Clinton's ambassadors did that. And then when I finished, I've done the same for every ambassador who is whether Democrat appointee or a Republican. I've always volunteered to come to Washington, meet with you. Got a whole legal pad of what I did right, what I did wrong, and share that with them. But there's nothing like learning by going there, meeting people, and getting out and about. Canadians know a lot about the United States. 90% of them live within 100 miles of the border. They keep up with our politics, our business, our sports. Americans think they know enough about Canada. I used to tell my Canadian friends, somebody got up in Livonia, Georgia this morning, did not think about Canada first thing. But if you get up, wake up in Windsor, you're thinking about crossing that Ambassador Bridge to Detroit. So it's a different mentality. So what do you do with that? I tell you what I did. I hit the road and traveled. Susan and I visited the 10 provinces and 3 territories in the first 6 months, and we made it a big point. We're going to get out and about and meet Canadians of all walks of life. We're going to learn from you. We don't have an agenda. We don't have the experience of growing up in Canada, but we're going to learn. And pretty soon, the press that was criticized, I'd seen more Canada they had. They quit criticizing me about it. And I used to say 90% of what you do as an ambassador is show up. You go to the events, you give the speeches, you go to the receptions. You are so visible, you got to get out and about. You can't hide behind your desk in the embassy. You got to get out and meet and greet people, and it goes a long way when you do. It's building relationships.
Great. We have someone over here, Nicholas.
Hey, thank you all for being here. I have a question about being perceived as a reliable partner in the world, because under Donald Trump, we've seen that previous contracts, agreements, partnerships such as NAFTA or NATO have been challenged and questioned. So I would like to know from you or your opinion on how can the US in the future be perceived as a reliable partner for international agreements if basically after every 4 years, previous contracts could be worth nothing?
It's a great question and an important question. And it's important to put it in the context of the broader foreign policy of the United States. Every presidency has its agreements that it creates, and every president changes those agreements. NAFTA, I would argue, the president actually undertook an effort to improve it with USMCA, Canada, Mexico, the United States, actually improved the US position in those negotiations. And in Europe, I have to say, Europeans are always skeptical. They were skeptical of President Obama, Clinton, Bush, Trump, sometimes more so for Trump, it depended on what tweet came out that day. But I have to say, I have been very surprised to hear how many Swiss business people and politicians have called me or texted me or written me and said, we didn't necessarily like the way he did what he did, but his policies were actually very good for us. The result of the lower taxes, corporate taxes, the result of the less regulation, the result of the bridge building that went on in the last administration in most of the European countries, mine particularly, the 2 that I worked with, was an extremely successful story about economic development and investment in the United States. This administration's changing things. They are making very serious changes on tax policy, regulatory policy, energy policy, and not all of Europe is really happy about this. All of the world is really happy with that direction. But again, what I think is critically important is having that relationship with your host country to be sure there are no surprises. What happened in France recently with the submarines was not necessary. That was a failure of diplomacy. France is a NATO ally of ours. We should be informing them, keeping them engaged, and ensuring that there are no surprises with a major ally like that. So I would say it's the course of foreign policy to see changes like this with every administration. The president that I served was a little more aggressive than most, but in the end, I think many are looking back on those policies and realizing there was some great success economically in particular from them.
And I would add that the popularity of the United States president of a particular country has more to do with whether they're centric or left-leaning or right-leaning in their political views, oftentimes in the action of the president. President Bush was I don't think nearly as appreciated in Canada as he should have been. He solved softwood lumber. He opened the borders when it was closed to mad cow disease. He was very, very pro-Canada. Yet he never received nearly the popularity of a President Obama did. He was hugely popular during his 8 years while he was president, and yet he denied, after delaying, ultimately denied the KXL pipeline, which was hugely important to Canada, yet he didn't lose that much popularity. And obviously, President Trump was a lot less popular than President Obama was, and yet many of his policies, although he was bound in turn to make the United States more competitive, many of his policies benefited Canada as well. USMCA ended up being a win-win, I think, for both countries.
Thank you. Oh, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I just want to make sure I understood, especially Ambassador Wilkins' answer correctly regarding reputation and reliability. So if the US sees a potential to get a better deal, then in the future, yes, the US is willing to be seen as a more unreliable partner regarding international agreements? Because, I mean, you said you were successful and everybody liked it and so on, but my question is more about, in the past, before President Trump, usually agreements were upheld from government to government to ensure that the US has a higher power of negotiation, because if everything can be overturned every 4 years, then it can be perceived as being unreliable in those agreements. Is that correct?
Well, no, I wouldn't agree with you on that. I think what I'm trying to make clear here is that foreign policy is transitory, it changes. We had agreements in 1810 that we changed over time, and they're not in place now. And so when you look at JCPOA, which is one good example, right? The agreement with Iran that was done under the Obama administration, and then you look at why President Trump retrieved or came out of the JCPOA, we're looking and living today exactly why we did it, because they were not verifiable goals on their nuclear arms. They now have them. They are absolutely engaged in many countries throughout the world, and we're not supposed to be funding arms and armies throughout the Middle East and causing discord. So why would you have an agreement with someone who's already abrogated the agreement? And that was the point. So no agreement is sacrosanct. Our goal as a country needs to be clear, speak with clarity, speak with strength, and make the objective very clear, and also recognize that we have allies that are a critical part of the strength and energy of that. And I think every president looks back and says, I could have done something differently, and maybe it would have been better. And I think this president would, or the past president, I think this president will do the same. So they are constantly changing, and I think that the community in Europe understands that, and I think they did understand at the end, that when President Trump went to Davos the first year of his office, and he said, America first does not mean America alone. It was a clear indication to our allies that you are a critical part of our efforts. And it didn't always look that way sometimes, but it was certainly the purpose and objective of our government.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, Emily, we're going to give and then we'll go over here. This is from people online. Could you tell us who this is from?
Great, yeah, so we've had a few questions online from Wyatt Sarhan and Alessio Domenica, and they would like to know, how does a global event such as COVID impact the ambassadorship? Furthermore, how does it affect communication between the two countries? And does it lead to closer collaboration between countries, or is it expected to result in individual actions as we observed during the initial onset of COVID?
Right. You know, COVID comes, is it a common enemy to bring people together, or does it fragment you?
Yeah.
What do you think?
This is a great question, because here I was in the midst of everything that I was doing in Switzerland, a great head of steam, moving on the free trade agreement, being able to come back and forth freely between the US and Switzerland. And then COVID hits and everything shuts down. And what I was really proud to see was how the Swiss and the US and our administrations came together to find, with Switzerland having some of the best pharmaceutical companies in the world, I was able to interact with the Roche, Moderna, Roche, oh Lord, I'm forgetting our number one. Pfizer, no, not Pfizer. Which one? Novartis. There we go. Novartis. They change their names so often I can never remember them. But Novartis and Roche, and they were all totally focused on finding as quick a solution for a vaccine as they could. And I met with the CEOs, conveyed the president and the administration's desire to do whatever it was necessary to ensure that we got what we needed. On PPO, some of the ventilators that were being made, Switzerland actually has an American company developing the most cutting-edge ventilators in the world. And we couldn't get them in the United States because they weren't being manufactured here. The FDA didn't approve them. So all those emergency regulations that were put into play was a combination of working with foreign countries throughout Europe, but Switzerland played a critical role. So I was in the midst of it and very proud to see how quickly the US and Switzerland were able to engage, develop, and deliver the vaccine, which is what we're thankfully, I personally am vaccinated. I think it's critical that we all get vaccinated, and it is obviously having a direct effect in South Carolina. The numbers are down. The US, they're down. Europe, they're down. So hopefully we're seeing the end of this. But it was definitely a disruptor.
You were not caught in the middle of it overseas necessarily, but did you have a perspective on that?
Well, if we ever had a common worldwide enemy, it certainly has been COVID. And I think the United States deserves a lot of credit for getting the the shots available. And then and once you take care of your own citizens, and we initially got criticized from Canadians about not sharing the vaccine. But once it was made available to Americans, we quickly shared it with other countries. We continue to do that. That's hugely important. We've got some of these countries are still in the throes of the terrible phases of the pandemic, and we've got to share that vaccine. So we're doing that, and that brings me to a broader point. One thing I learned a lot about Canada when I was in Canada, but I also learned a lot about the United States. And one thing is, the world expects us to lead. I remember having, lunch with several ambassadors, and they said, we don't, even when we don't agree with you, don't back away. You have to lead. If you don't, there's a vacuum there, and it's filled by bad actors sometimes. And so we've got to take the lead. We've got to continue to take the lead until this COVID is wiped off the face of the earth, or at least controlled, not just in our country, and not just in our allies' country, but in every country.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Hebert, and I'm an undergraduate here. My question was, despite Switzerland and Canada maintaining positive relationships with the U.S., what were some of the challenges you guys faced with preserving U.S. national security interests or competing interests with theirs?
For us, I have to say, there were very few occasions with Swiss-U.S. relations, Liechtenstein-U.S. relations, where we didn't have agreement, because Switzerland is often called we're the sister republics. They borrowed from our Articles of Confederation. We borrowed from them in our various documents. We have very similar cultural and originating documents that actually bind us. So we didn't have a lot of difference. I think if there were one or two things, the Swiss are very focused on direct democracy. So they don't move very quickly like our government does, although our government doesn't always move quickly either. But ours is intended to move quicker. But both direct democracy, the cantons, the states, have the ability to vote. It's really true federalism. It's really true democracy, because the government in Bern does not govern as an executive, right? the local governments really do tax policy. The foreign policy is dealt with in Bern, but where we had occasions where we had some tensions, probably on the tax treaty. There had been a tax treaty that had been implemented 8 years before I got there, had been held up in the Senate. And the Swiss really wanted that tax treaty because it would have made things easier for US and Swiss business to do business. And so I basically said, well, what's the holdup? And there were a couple of senators holding it up. Flew back to Washington, met with the senators, heard what their concerns were. The Swiss were willing to deal with those concerns. We had the tax treaty signed. The other big issue for the Swiss is their banking system. The Swiss have the oldest banking system in the world, very, very strong banks, very safe banks. And they had, in the Bush and Obama administrations, heavy investigations on privacy, bank privacy. There's a lot of animosity in Switzerland still to this day as to how the US treated the Swiss banks, because they're hundreds of years old and highly regarded. My goal was to try and resolve some of that, and the administration's position was, that's behind us, let's move forward, we fixed the problems, and we have. And Switzerland today has one of the most vibrant banking systems. They're reporting and working with our country so that there is no tax cheating going on, we hope. I mean, never make an absolute statement like that. But the goal is to have none. And I think it's, again, taking terrible situations, turning them into positive things.
I mentioned several of the irritants and disputes, softwood lumber, coal, tariffs, protectionism. But for those, there are many, many more examples of cooperation between Canada, I think our best friend, and the United States. And I want to point one out to you, NORAD. It's the North American Aerospace Defense Command. It was established in 1958. It's the only binational military command in the world. You've got Canadian servicemen, Air Force folks, used to be at Cheyenne Mountain, now it's at Colorado Springs, near there. And the headquarters in Canada is in Manitoba. And you've got U.S. servicemen up there manning the skies, protecting North America. And the interesting fact is on 9/11, when the Twin Towers were hit, the person in the chair at Cheyenne Mountain was scrambling the jets, shutting down airspace in North America, requiring all the planes to land, was a Canadian Air Force general under NORAD.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Another question? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mandy Harper, and I'm an undergrad international business student here. And my question is just, I'm sure a lot of people like me are potentially interested in entering foreign service at some point in their career. What are the biggest downsides or pain points you think in that career? And especially as a young person, what should you keep in mind?
Downside of foreign service? You have to move every 3 years. You don't live in one place a long time. I think most of the rotations, at least when I was in Canada, you would go to another country for 3 years and another country for 3 years, and then I think within 12 years you have to come back to Washington for 3 years. But you know, out of 15 years, you may spend 4 years in a foreign country and 3 years in your own country. So I guess that certainly could be a downside for some folks. You know, what's interesting about foreign service is sort of like the military. A lot of the folks I talked to that were in foreign service had a parent that served in the foreign service, that served in the State Department, and they were used to that. And so they sort of grew up in that, so that was part of their culture. And so it was not an issue for them.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, with anything comes a downside, right? But the upsides far outweigh the downsides. The people that I worked with, the agencies that worked in the embassy, they loved now Switzerland was the choice place to be. Everybody loved being in Switzerland. It was a hard post to get. But listening and getting to know your team and hearing their stories in Mogadishu or in in Beirut. I mean, they've been in places around the world that no one gets to see. And if you're a adrenaline junkie and you really want to go out and serve your country, that's the place to do it. But it is dangerous. I mean, there's a whole wall at the State Department of people who died in their service to their country. It's not a walk in the park. Every day I went out, I had an armored car and bodyguards in a beautiful, safe country like Switzerland, because you never knew who was going to be out there. But overwhelmingly, the positives outweigh the negatives. And from a business perspective, for those of you looking at a career in business, I mean, I'm a businessman, and I can tell you, I work with a lot of CEOs and chairmen of companies. That experience for those people who've been in the Foreign Service, many of them go on to do amazingly successful careers in the private sector.
Thank you.
It should be noted, you should be aware too, that the most common that we hear about is through the State Department, but don't forget, you have similar positions or avenues via Treasury, Commerce Department, U.S. Trade Representative, and of course the multilateral too.
Even CIA or the intelligence
DOD.
arms, they all have business sides too.
Great. We have another set of questions from the stratosphere.
I would love to bring a question from Lauren Strassenruther, who is a Master of International Business from 1997 German track. And they ask, what role does environmental sustainability play in negotiation and collaboration cross-border today? Do you believe we maximize opportunities, or do you see additional potential with your countries or with other countries?
So that was from an alum, and it's basically about how these issues of sustainability and environmental issues enter into these conversations about trade and other matters.
Well, we talked a little bit about this at lunch today. Americans who are interested in sustainability and environmental issues should go to Europe, because the Europeans are doing some of the most innovative technology advances in the world. And for us to lecture any country in Europe on what they should be doing, I think is an insult. I don't think that's our position. I don't think it's appropriate. And frankly, lecturing doesn't get you anywhere in foreign policy and diplomacy. Working together as teams does. And that's where I think we're seeing some of the great breakthroughs on environmental and technology changes in the world. And I think we'll continue to see that. Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Germany, France on nuclear. France is amazingly progressive. These are the real opportunities for carbon-free world, and I think the U.S. is an important leader because we have a lot of technology as well, but we're certainly not leading right now, despite what we all may think.
I agree. We need to lead, but we don't need to lecture.
Very good, very good.
Hi, my name is Taylor Grippentrog, and I'm a senior studying international business. And as someone particularly interested in your line of work, how does one get started? And I know we were just talking about environmental sustainability, and that's something I'm very passionate about. And as an ambassador, are you able to say, hey, I want to focus on this when you go overseas, or are you kind of involved in everything?
So our embassy, one of the great myths about President Trump is that he was not supportive of the environmental sustainability and carbon capturing and emissions and all the issues that were important. What our administration was truly focused on was finding ways to get technologies that would actually solve the problems rather than government mandates, right? Invest in those technologies. And we were successful in many ways in doing that. And I think this administration has thankfully taken on some of that role as well. So I think as an ambassador, it was an issue in Switzerland, but Switzerland was so progressive. I learned a lot from Switzerland. So I was able to share with our administration some of the things the Swiss were doing. And we actually adopted many of those things. On my residence grounds, the ambassador gets a residence, unfortunately in Switzerland, it's right next to the embassy. Most of them have to drive an hour to get to them. You had a long drive to yours, but it was great to be there. But I created a sustainability program within the the grounds of the residence and the embassy. We had a very interesting team of diplomats in Bern who were focused on it, and we came together. And so, everyone learns from each other in this diplomatic world. And as an interest that you have, you'd find it very comforting to know this would be a very welcoming place for you to pursue your career. How you do that? Look at taking the Foreign Service exam. Look at one of the agencies in government where you could travel and actually experience diplomacy and foreign relations. But you're in the right place right now to be a valid asset, a valuable asset.
Ambassador Wilkins?
I agree. Canada was into sustainability before it was cool to be into sustainability. And now the U.S. and Canada are looking for many ways to collaborate regarding that, reducing reliance on fossil fuels.
Okay, one last question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, this gentleman here.
My name is Ryan, and I'm a global studies major here.
You can take down your mask.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to know, as an ambassador, what kind of interaction did you have with regional military commands? So for, like in Europe, the European Command, or with Canada, Northern Command, what kind of interactions did you guys have with them?
Help me out, I can't hear.
The military interaction that you had with Canada.
Yeah.
Any of the military.
Well, it's we had a lot when I was in Canada. Canada was heavily involved in Afghanistan. There were some of the early troops on the ground there, and I had the great privilege of visiting Afghanistan and the Canadian troops in December of '07 with the Chief of Defense for Canada and the equivalent Secretary of Defense, and it was most memorable trip I'll ever take, because it made you appreciate that we live in such a wonderful place in a free country. And but Canada and the United States have always shared military strategies, military personnel. We have Canadians down at Fort Bliss and some other areas of our country training at various times. And Canada's blessed. And I pointed this out to them on many occasions. To live next to the United States affords you the ability not to spend as much money on defense as you otherwise might have to, because we're doing that. NORAD is a good example of that. Although they're a great participant in that, we're taking care of protecting the space for North America. It's great interaction, and it continues to be, like I said, we have servicemen in Canada. They have service personnel in the United States.
So all of our embassies around the world have military attachés who are American military leaders who have amazing expertise. All throughout Europe, being a major part of NATO, Switzerland not being in NATO because they're a neutral country. I love the Swiss because they say we're neutral, but we know who our friends are, right? And they also have a major defense. So I had the great pleasure of working with the Swiss military on the contract that they're putting, a $6 billion contract to get a new Air Force plane. Boeing had provided the F-18 for them for 50 years, and Lockheed just got the contract for the F-35. And I worked to make sure that we beat out France and Germany and others who are competing, and we were successful. So working with the military was fundamental for me. It was a major part of my time in Switzerland to ensure that we got that contract. And also we got the contract for the Patriot missiles that Switzerland uses. So while Switzerland is neutral, no one screws with them because they're very well protected.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you maybe to give your big picture perspectives over the next few years, if you have to inform our audience here, maybe like one or two things we should keep our eyes on when we're thinking about some big trade issues and investment issues on the horizon, you know, that you've gleaned over the years. Ambassador Wilkins, you want to go?
Well, as I think really the future of the international trade system. I mean, are we going to have strong support for free and fair trade? throughout the world, or are we going to have more protectionism and more managed trade? And I think that's a real issue. I'm a free trader, and I want it to be fair, but I think protectionism cannot be and will not be successful. And so you look at the different relationships we have. In the United States, again, we'll lead in that, and how we act and what we advocate will have a huge effect. Do we push large trade agreements like TPP, or do we try to do different bilateral trade agreements, just with one or two countries, like the USMCA, that took the place of NAFTA? So I think that's going to be, Brexit, and the European Union is going through that discussion right now. I think that's going to be interesting to see where we are 5 years from now. The other thing we obviously have got a great concern about, should have a concern about, is supply chains. Whether it's ports backing up in California, or fuel shortages in Europe, or whatever it is, we definitely have some supply chain shortages right now. I mean, I think the automobile production in the U.S. is suffering from that today. And then the third thing I'd be concerned about, I am concerned about, is China. They are a serious adversary. And many think we're right now in a Cold War with China. They don't play by the same rules that the rest of us play by. So that's something we've got to be aware of and take into account.
So on trade, I think one of the major changes that we've seen in the last 5 years on trade policy, we've had decades of open and free trade, and I am a free trader as well. But what we found is that many countries don't reciprocate. And so I think you're seeing economists and trade institutions, particularly Americans, who were disadvantaged by many of this lack of reciprocity, particularly with China, looking at free, fair, and reciprocal trade. Those three key parts make for everyone to be a winner and able to gain from it. I do think on the trade front, the EU and its problems that are emerging are real. And there are dissatisfactions within various parts of the EU, the poorer countries that are new to the EU versus the wealthier countries that govern the EU. There's a lot of tension, and this is not good. Tension and uncertainty in that region is not a good thing, because it's a critical region for national security for us and for alliances with NATO. And so I would say that there are some emerging interesting trends. I like to call it the new axis of trade, where you have Brexit and Britain, and then you have Switzerland, which is an independent from the EU, where they're creating opportunities to have one-off bilateral arrangements. And the Swiss just signed a very important bilateral agreement for trade with the Brits. And I think you're going to see more of this. And the US, Britain, Switzerland are a very interesting axis of trade, because in Switzerland you have all of the major pharmaceuticals, you have the banking and financial institutions. In Britain you have the great trading ally that we've had there. And then US, you have the markets that we provide for many of them. Germany, France, and other larger countries, Spain. I was just in Spain and France. And I can tell you, this is something that concerns a lot of business people. What is the future? What does it look like? How is the EU emerging in the 21st century? And I think and hope that we will all come together to find ways to ensure that we strengthen our trade systems and succeed. Because I know that Britain, Switzerland, and the US have done that and are moving in that direction. And we need to see that more on the EU side.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to again thank all of you for joining us today. But please join me in giving a round of applause to our distinguished guests taking the time with us. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. It's been wonderful.